Good morning. You know, there is a kind of exhaustion that has nothing whatsoever to do with sleep. You can go to bed at a reasonable hour. Your watch says you slept good. That's how I tell how I slept. Renee asked me how I slept. I have to look at my watch to give an answer. So you slept well. You can still function. You can do what needs to be done. And still, there's something inside you that feels heavy. There isn't any crisis at the moment. There's nothing broken in any obvious way. There's just this weight. And the hardest part is that you can't really identify why. Because it isn't always some tragedy or failure or loss that you can point to. Sometimes life is good. You don't have any major problems to deal with. There's lots of good things going on, lots of things to be grateful for, and yet just underneath the surface, there is this pressure that you can't shake. And that's what makes it so hard to explain. Because when something is broken in your life, or if things are falling apart, you know where to look. But this is different. There's nothing to solve. There's nothing to fix. Instead, it is just the weight of everything all at once pressing down on you. And over time, it just becomes so intense. And like I said, hard to describe. You don't feel it in the moments. You feel it in the accumulation. Just this slow building day after day, week after week, month after month. And you get this steady rhythm of walking through life, and all these ordinary things just become a burden that you struggle to bear. But you keep going. You get up, you show up, you do what needs to be done. You learn how to smile when you need to smile. You learn to say, I'm great, because it's easier than explaining what's really going on. And you don't even know how to explain it anyway. So you just keep moving so you don't have to stop and feel it so long. But underneath that front, the question doesn't really go away. When things slow down, when there's nothing demanding your attention, when the noise fades and your mind catches up with your soul, there it is again. Why do I feel like this? And here's the thing. People feel this pressure and they carry it privately. And they assume that they're the only person that feels that way, which just makes it worse. Because now you wonder, is something wrong with me that I feel this way? And so into that, Ecclesiastes enters the room. Not with some shallow religious slogan, not with a cliche about, hey, everything's going to work out in the end. Instead, it speaks with a kind of brutal honesty that makes people uncomfortable. And so this morning, we're going to listen to that voice. Ecclesiastes is going to deal with this in a couple of parts. It's going to start by looking outward and showing us that the world doesn't work the way that it should. And then it turns inward and it reminds us that death is coming for everyone. And you take those two truths, you mash them together, and that shows you where that weight comes from. And then we get to the meat of this, which is where Solomon explores the different ways that people try to carry that weight, because they look incredibly different. So we begin by looking at the world around us. So Ecclesiastes 3, starting in verse 16, says, Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness. And in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. Now, we all know that evil and brokenness exist. That isn't hard to see. But that isn't what Solomon wants to focus on. Instead, he looks at things that are supposed to be good, right, wonderful things. And he says, hey, even there, even with the best of things, it's broken. So think about how this looks today. You would expect to find justice in the legal system. But then if you look at it, you can see that there's people who can afford the best lawyers, who can manipulate the system, and they can do all kinds of wicked things and then walk away like nothing happened. And in that same system, you see people being freed after decades in prison because DNA proved they were innocent all along. So it's the same courtroom, the same laws, but very different outcomes. And in the place of justice, there is corruption and brokenness. And that is one system, but that truth applies to all of them. So we can talk about leaders who should protect, and instead they use their authority to oppress or to control others or exploit others. You can look at politicians who make decisions based upon their own interests instead of governing with integrity. And the point of this is that every institution that is supposed to bring about good things is broken because people are sinful. In place of justice, there is wickedness. And then the other thing that Solomon mentions is righteousness. That's where we would expect the church to shine. And yet even there, we see brokenness and wickedness. Some churches cover up sexual abuse to protect their reputation. Others trade righteousness for cash by preaching a prosperity gospel or just telling people what they want to hear. There's lots of pastors with moral failures. There are churches who are abandoning the truth just so they can be embraced by the culture. And all of that is wickedness. And Solomon isn't trying to be cynical here. He's telling the truth about a broken, sin-stained world. And the point here is that these aren't exceptions. This is what sin does. It infiltrates absolutely everything. See, back when Adam first sinned in the garden, all of creation was broken as a result. We read this verse a moment ago together. In Romans 8:20, it says, "For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, and hope that creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now." And because of this reality, every single thing is broken and tainted as a result. None of it works the way it's supposed to. So that's that first layer. So he examines the world around him. He says, listen, all of it is broken. Nothing works. And that starts building that weight. And then he turns inward to see if there's anything better. So in verse 18 it says, "I said in my heart with regard to the children of man that God is testing them that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beasts, for all is vanity." Now we need to be careful here. Solomon isn't saying that men and animals are the same. Genesis 1:27 still stands, which says God created man in his own image. And in the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. So we, people, are created in the image of God, and we have inherent value that animals don't have. So what Solomon is doing here is trying to get us to consider our own mortality. The one thing that we all have in common is that every single one of us is going to die if the Lord tarries. It doesn't matter how smart you are. You can go and get PhDs, have a string of letters after your name, or you can drop out in the 3rd grade and be illiterate. You both die. You can make billions of dollars. You can become a captain of industry, or you can live paycheck to paycheck and struggle every week. It doesn't matter. You both die. And it doesn't matter what standard you use. Doesn't matter how you measure it. We're all headed to the same end. And verse 20 just puts it out there bluntly. It says, all go to one place. All are from the dust, and to dust all return. And if that sounds familiar, it should. Because Genesis 3:19 already told us that after the fall, it says, by the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of it you are taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So Solomon isn't just saying that the world out there is broken. He isn't just saying that institutions are corrupt. He's saying that you aren't in control of how it all ends. You can plan carefully, you can work diligently, you can live wisely, you can do everything right, and you're still going to end up in the same cemetery as everybody else. Sure, you might have a nicer box or a nicer headstone or maybe a more exclusive piece of ground, but you are still dead and buried and gone. And that presses against us. Because most of us live with this quiet assumption that effort produces stability and that wisdom produces security. In Ecclesiastes, I don't even know what that is just dismantling that illusion. So you have these two perspectives of the world. First, everything is broken, even the good stuff. And the second is, you're going to die. And those two things mixed together are what are bringing that weight upon you. Because it seems like no matter where you turn, everything is failing you. The world out there doesn't have answers, and there's nothing you can do about it. And so Solomon takes all that, and now he says that people respond to that reality in different ways. Everybody feels that weight, we just don't handle it the same. And what that means is that you should be able to see yourself in one of the ways that Solomon describes it, because people don't change. So some people experience that weight, and they just can't see a way out. So what they do is they drown in despair. Verses 2 and 3, it says, "And I thought the dead who are already dead more fortunate than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been and has not seen the evil deeds that are under the sun." And Solomon isn't being poetic for effect here. He is showing how some people think when they become overwhelmed by the brokenness of the world. Because if all you can see is what is wrong, and all you can feel is broken, something starts to happen internally. Hope doesn't weaken, it just begins to collapse. And life itself begins to feel like a burden rather than a gift. So he says that in that frame of mind, a person can begin to think it would be better not to be alive. Not because death is desirable, but because it feels like an escape. They want to do anything they can to take that weight off, and they don't see any way out. And it goes a step further. It says, it would have been better if I'd never even been born. That is how deeply distorted our view of reality can become when it's interpreted through the lens of under the sun. You can get to the point where existence itself feels like torment. And you need to hear this. Solomon is not endorsing that conclusion. He's exposing it. He's pulling back the curtain on what happens in a human soul when it is overwhelmed by the reality of a fallen world and it has no anchor beyond it. And when that happens, everything becomes distorted. Suffering becomes the defining feature of life, and brokenness takes center stage. And even the good gets overshadowed by what's wrong. In Ecclesiastes, just kind of lets us sit in that for a moment. It's not rushing to fix it, because part of wisdom is being willing to be honest about what's going on. And that is one way people respond to the brokenness of our world. But it's not the only way. See, not everyone feels the weight and gets undone by it. And they look at the people who do get undone and they say, man, you need to get over it, just pick yourself up, go, because they can't grasp it. And instead, they conclude that if nothing matters, they're going to build something that does matter. So if they're surrounded by brokenness, they want to create something good. In verse 4, it says, "Then I saw that all the toil and all skill and work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This is also vanity and is striving after the wind." And Solomon isn't saying that work itself is wrong. He's trying to show us what drives it. He's envy of his neighbor. In other words, comparison. And this lays a lot closer to home than we might like to admit, because this is about the human heart, and that doesn't change. And what Solomon is exposing is not just that we work hard, it's why we work hard. We like to tell ourselves that we are driven, disciplined, ambitious people. We convince ourselves that we're just trying our best They were trying to build something meaningful, and Solomon pulls that apart. He says, hey, you need to look closer. Because a lot of what drives us is how we measure up to the people around us. So let me give you an example. Think about how fashion is always changing. What people wore when you were young would look ridiculous today. It doesn't matter if that was the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, doesn't matter which one. But why? Did everyone wake up one day and independently decide, man, I don't like a mullet anymore. I want to do something different? Of course not. See, what changed wasn't taste, it was the standard. And the standard is always moving because it is being set by people looking at other people. And you can do that with anything. You can do that with hairstyles or music or cars or how you decorate your house or whatever. You think you're picking what you like, but you're really just being shaped by your surroundings. And here's the thing. Comparison doesn't just create conformity. It creates competition, whether you recognize it or not. It begins with people wanting to fit in, and it quickly moves to people wanting to be better. And technology makes this worse. One of the great tragedies of social media is that it gives people the ability to curate how they are viewed. Because you can pose and primp, just give a little glimpse of your life and make it look awesome. But I mean, who are they trying to fool? What is the value in making yourself look better than you really are? And what Solomon is saying is this isn't just true with fashion or little things in your life. It infiltrates all of it. It shapes how you think. It shapes how you work. It shapes how your relationships. It changes what you think success looks like. And here's the trap. You can't be satisfied in something when the standard is always moving. And Scripture speaks to this. Galatians 6, it says, but let each one test his own work, and then his reason to boast will be in himself alone and not in his neighbor. Can you see the contrast? Comparison robs you of joy. Stop looking at other people and what they have and what they do. Look at what Jesus said in Luke. He said, take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And that's what comparison fuels. It fuels covetousness. It's a constant awareness of what you don't have, paired with a growing dissatisfaction with what you do have. And here's the point that Solomon is trying to make. You can't fix the weight of life just by deciding, I'm going to go ahead and do something that matters. Whether it's building something great or pouring into your kids or leaving a legacy. Because if comparison is what is driving you and whatever you're trying to build, you'll never be satisfied no matter how great you get it. That's why he says, hey, this is like chasing after the wind. You're chasing after something that can never be caught. Because the problem isn't just out there in the world. And that means it can't be solved by working harder in it. The problem was what drives the heart underneath. So some people, they face the brokenness of life, they wallow in despair. That doesn't help. Others face the same brokenness and try to make something of their lives anyway, but that doesn't work either. And Solomon describes one more response, starting in verse 7. He says, again, I saw a vanity under the sun. One person who has no other, either son or brother, yet there is no end to all of his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? This also is vanity and an unhappy business. See, some people face the brokenness of our sin-stained world, and it leads them to isolate. And ultimately, that's the overflow of just trying to build something for yourself. Because you're going to pour your time and your effort and all of yourself into building something. And Solomon describes this guy. He's not lazy. He's not unproductive. He works constantly. It's describing somebody who fills their life with activity, but never builds meaningful relationships. And I think what drives that is an attempt to avoid being hurt or disappointed by people. See, somewhere along the way, this person learned that people disappoint you, that relationships are risky, and that dependence opens the door to pain. So the safest path forward feels like relying on yourself. And that is a slow and subtle path. No one ever plans on being completely isolated. They just keep pushing people away until there's no one else left. And it's all because relationships require something they're no longer willing to give. That's vulnerability. And Solomon says this is vanity. That is an unhappy business. And then he really levels the idea of withdrawing in Ecclesiastes 4:9. He says, two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. In other words, there is something fundamentally right about a shared life. God built into us a design that thrives on companionship. We are relational beings. And he just kind of unpacks that for a bit and argues that life is better when it's shared with others. So here's where we're at. The world is broken beyond measure. Nothing works the way it's supposed to. And all that has been twisted up by sin in the fall so that nothing is left untainted. And that people, they respond to that in different ways. Some people it leads to despair and depression. For some it leads to business trying to build something, which sounds better, but you still end up dead. And other people just pull away into isolation. Now, what do we do with this? Because Ecclesiastes has been working here to strip our illusions away. It's trying to show us how pervasive sin is in destroying creation. It's all tainted. It's all broken. That's true for systems and relationships, and it's true for us as individuals. Death is coming for all of us. But the real issue here isn't just what we experience, it is how we respond to what we experience. And it doesn't matter if it's despair or withdrawal or the attempt to make something of yourself. None of those responses help. They're just managing that weight differently. So what do we do with the weight? Because Ecclesiastes doesn't just give you permission to collapse under it and only just pretend that it's not there. It is doing something far more uncomfortable and far more loving, and that is it is forcing you to stop explaining it away. It's naming what you already feel and then refusing to let you to settle for shallow answers. See, most people are already living with this kind of silent misdiagnosis. They assume the heaviness they feel must be situational. That if they could change their environment, maybe their schedule, their relationships, whatever, it would get better. But Ecclesiastes is saying the weight doesn't come from your particular circumstances. It comes from the world being broken by sin. That's why it lingers there even when everything is going good in life. That's why it shows up when nothing is wrong. And once you grasp that reality, two things become clear. The first is you aren't alone in how you feel. And the second is you aren't going to fix it by rearranging your life. And that shifts the question. It isn't how do I get rid of this weight, but how do I live faithfully under it? And the answer isn't to try harder, to optimize your circumstances, and it isn't to find the right perspective or to think rightly. Think of it this way. If the weight isn't ultimately the result of one broken situation, then the solution can't be found by rearranging situations. If the problem is deeper than your environment, the answer has to be something deeper than your environment as well. And all of this goes back to this overarching theme of under the sun. What is under the sun is broken, so nothing under the sun gives you the answers you're looking for. You can't find it in philosophy or productivity or even moral effort, because all of those things still live inside that same closed system. And what this is doing is narrowing the option until only one hope remains. God must do something from outside the system if anything is going to change within it. And you can't see that fully just in the few chapters of the book, but this is where Ecclesiastes is just relentlessly driving us week after week. And when you step into the whole story of Scripture, that's exactly what you find. God doesn't send an explanation into the world. He sends his Son. Jesus didn't come to explain why life feels heavy. He entered into the heaviest parts of it. He walked into the injustice of corrupted courts. He stepped into the futility of a world where death levels everything, and he takes on himself the full weight of creation that is groaning under the curse. And he does something that Ecclesiastes can only point to but can never accomplish. He pays the price that our sin earned. He dies the death that we deserve, and then he rises from the grave 3 days later. And that means that the story of the world is no longer trapped in this endless cycle of dust to dust with no exit. See, the resurrection of Christ is the declaration that the system has been broken open from the inside. That the weight you feel is real, but it isn't final. And that changes how you interpret it in the present. Because if Christ is risen, the heaviness you carry is no longer proof that life is meaningless. That's what Ecclesiastes keeps saying, right? Vanity, vanity, all is vanity. It says it's meaningless. It's a vapor. And the resurrection says no. No, there is something beyond that. Instead of being a weight that you simply press down, it becomes something that starts pointing you forward. And Paul uses language that picks this up. He calls it this light momentary affliction in 2 Corinthians 4. Not because it feels light in the moment, but because it is measured against something even heavier that is coming. And this light affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. So there's two weights there. One is the weight of the broken world pressing in on you now. The other is the weight of glory that is being prepared in Christ. And what Ecclesiastes is doing is trying to get you to stop expecting the present world to carry the weight of the second one. So what does it mean to live faithfully under it? It means you stop trying to extract ultimate satisfaction from what was never designed to hold it. It means you stop treating every single frustration as a problem to eliminate and start recognizing some of it as part of living in the tension between the fall and restoration. This world is broken. That doesn't change because you become a Christian. It doesn't change because you're following God. Your life will still be hard. You're still going to have things that don't work the way they're supposed to. And when you flesh it out, it means that you can grieve honestly without falling into despair. It means you can work diligently without basing your value on what you achieve. It means you can enjoy good gifts without demanding that they give you ultimate satisfaction. And underneath it all, there's a deeper shift happening. You no longer see your life as something you are meant to master, but as something you're meant to receive from the hand of God while you wait on him to finish what he has started. See, Ecclesiastes isn't going to resolve everything. It isn't going to fix your problems. It isn't meant to. It's meant to create a longing within you. It's meant to loosen your grip on things that are temporary and to look for a hope beyond it. And that hope has a name. See, Jesus isn't just the answer to individual sins. He is the answer to the weight of the broken creation. So when you feel that weight that you can't explain, you aren't experiencing something outside the scope of redemption. You're feeling the tension between a fallen world and a coming kingdom. And he doesn't meet you there with a quick escape. He meets you there with himself. So the path forward isn't to escape that weight. It is communion with the one who has already carried it. He's already defeated it, and he will one day remove it entirely. Have you please stand for our closing hymn? It's in Christ alone.